Well, I got to say, I moderated a few dozen of these, and every time I say, well, this panel needs no introduction, and for the first time in my life, I actually mean it. So no, I will dispense with the intros. Everybody knows everybody here. It's an honor to have you all. And we are going to talk about why to give. I mean, this is, it's kind of to tie in everything we've talked about today and bring it all together and just talk about the moral reasons, why people who've been very successful, should or should not give back. Maybe I'll start with, and again, I'm going to throw it out, and I told our panelists that they should just ask questions of each other. Everybody here knows each other, so we're just going to kind of make it freewheeling. Is it an intellectual or an emotional decision when you give? How much, let's talk about the balance of those two. Anybody who wants it? Just how much is it intellectual, I can do good, versus emotional, I feel like I have an obligation to do good? Melinda, please.
Well, I'll say that it's both, but I won't say that the emotional piece is because I have an obligation. I would say that I think anytime you give, it has to be from your heart. You have to give something that you're passionate about. If not, you don't do it. And I think one of the amazing things about philanthropy is getting out, at least for us, getting out into the world and talking to people, and you realize how similar people are in terms of what they want and their needs. And they move you by the unbelievable things they're doing themselves to lift themselves up in these unbelievable circumstances, no matter where they are in the world. So for me, it's a heart tug that I feel and that I carry every time I come back home, be it Seattle or New York. But then it's your intellectual head that you have to put on when you're back home constantly, and even when you're out in the field talking to scientists and researchers, your intellectual head that says, okay, so I met that one person or that one family or that group of villagers, but how do I impact tens of millions? How do I use this money that's at our disposal to have the very biggest impact? And it's your brain that hopefully takes over when you're back home to help guide that emotion that you feel that keeps fueling while you give. At least that, for me, is how I would describe it.
David?
I can't top that, and I would agree with everything you've said. My theory is, number one, you should give money because when you give money, it's selfish. You will feel better about yourself. Nobody who gives away money says, I feel terrible about myself. I wish I hadn't given that money away. I hate myself for giving away that money. You feel better about yourself, and therefore, when you feel better about yourself, you're going to live longer because your emotional health will be better. Second, you might actually help somebody. You never know. When you try to do something, all the times you try to do something, it doesn't always work, but sometimes you might actually help people, and it's a natural human instinct to help other people. And third, you might get to heaven more quickly. Now, I can't prove that, but why would we take a chance? So, there's mixed emotions about why you give, to be serious. You can only do three things with money. You can give it away, when you're in terms of giving it away, you can give it to your children, you can give it to your executor to give away, or you can give it away while you're alive. And at least my theory is it's much better to give it away while you're alive. How much can you give to your children before you completely spoil and ruin them? Very few people who inherit gigantic sums have gone on to change the world for the better. Some have, and maybe some of you are in the room that have done so. But generally, the people who've changed the world for the better are people who made it on their own and ultimately didn't want to just distribute wealth to somebody else. So I think when you give away money while you're alive, I think it's a good thing, and I don't think you should give it all to your children. I think letting an executor give it away, I think, is not a great thing. If you can give away as much money as you can while you're alive, I think you'll realize the benefits that I just mentioned before, and I also think you'll feel much better about yourself, and your children will feel much better about you if you care about that.
But the other piece that Gene and I have learned is we started our foundation about 15 years ago, so we're still in our 30s, still kind of figuring it out, still focused mostly on, particularly I was mostly on the business side, but even the definition of giving, it's clear to us now there's sort of three different ways to give. One is to give money, write a check, which is important. Two is to give your time and really focus on the issue with passion. And three, essentially, is to give your reputation, leverage your network and try to plug people together. Initially, we started kind of did some startups and did one initiative around digital divide, for example. We gave a fair amount of money away. And we started investing in kind of what we thought of as not startups, but speed ups, organizations like Habitat for Humanity and Special Olympics trying to expand their efforts. But for the first half of that experience, up to probably 7, 8 years, we actually didn't even have a website, which is odd given all the money came from the internet, because we thought it would be better just to kind of quietly do it. We didn't really want to call a lot of attention to it. But then we realized we really weren't using our most unique and precious assets, which are the ability to connect people together, build collaboration, shine a spotlight on issues. So the last 7 or 8 years, we've been much more focused on those as well, which really led us to commit to the Giving Pledge. It wasn't so much for us making a public commitment. It was more trying to leverage everybody's expertise and create a network effect around the givers. And some of the things that we've done with the different groups getting together to talk about different things and learning from each other and trying not to make the same mistakes over and over again, that to us was the real leverage. So the capital, the financial commitment obviously is important, but also looking at ways you can uniquely give of your time as well as leverage your network, I think it can be even more important in the long run.
Seizing on something, Melinda, you said, you were talking about how people like to give to something they know. And that's something, I mean, you see even with the woman people gave $500,000 to the lady who got bullied on the school bus in Rochester. When people see something, they want to give to it. Now, Melinda, you and Bill are giving to, and dedicated to a lot of things that are very abstract and very far away from us. And how do you find, in terms of getting people excited about things that most of the people giving have no real understanding of?
Well, I think the best thing is to encourage people to get out and see the things. If you get somebody to go to Africa and see the beauty, and yet also get a glimpse of what happens to children, that malaria is this awful thing, not just in terms of deaths, but the number of kids who are permanently damaged, never able to learn because they've had either malnutrition or malaria, it really draws you in. And there's no substitute for actually going and seeing it. Same thing with schools. If you go to a inner city school and see some of the pathologies that can develop in terms of how it's protected and there's security and people aren't really going to the classes much, and then you go to a place a few blocks away that, say, is a charter school that's been run on a different basis, and you see that contrast, you really want all the kids to have what you see at the second place. And so I think you've got to have genuine experiences. That's kind of the retail end. And then you a little bit step back and say, okay, what is it about that system? Why isn't the combination of the market plus government able to solve that? Who's really studying how you reward teachers? Who's really studying why they're good? What is the institutional framework that would change that? That involves working with experts, doing a lot of thinking, but it's got to be that kind of retail experience of it that creates this dedication to it.
I'm not sure whether it's intellectual or emotional, but when I was born in 1930 in the United States, the odds were 40-1 against me being born in the United States as opposed to someplace else. I was a male, the odds were even money on that. So now I'm down to 80-1, a shot. I mean, you don't want to bet on 80-1 shots normally, but I got lucky. And Bill says if I'd been born a few thousand years ago, I'd have been some animal's lunch, because I'd have gone on saying, well, I allocate capital, and the animals say they're the kind that taste the best, and I can't run fast and I can't climb trees. And so here I am by pure luck. Born at the right time, the right gender, as it turned out, compared to my sisters who were just as smarter than I am, in the right place, and in a system where allocating capital pays off like crazy. And like I don't feel guilty about that. I do feel grateful about it. And I've got a whole bunch of stock certificates sitting in a box. They've been down there for 40 years. I haven't even looked at them for years. I could get down there and fondle them occasionally, but that's about all they're good for, to me. I mean, they have no utility to me. They have all kinds of utility to the people that Bill and Melinda are talking about. And so, I mean, it's incredible utility. And what can they do for me? They can't do anything as a practical matter. So it just seems so obvious that get them where they're useful.
Was there who can speak to a moment when kind of something clicked and you thought, this is something I should do. I should start giving on a massive scale? Any kind of epiphany
I
moments?
can't remember back that far. I'm sure I remember what we had for lunch.
I'll tell just one story, which is, Bill and I had already decided after we were engaged that the money that had come from Microsoft would go back to society. That was a given. We both came from families that believed in that and believed in volunteerism and civic work. But our first trip to Africa was after we were engaged, about a few months before we were to be married in the fall of 1993. And we went to see the animals and the safari. We had a group with us. We had an amazing trip. We didn't go to see the poverty. We weren't going because we thought, okay, we're going to have this foundation and this is what it's do. But you can't but help be in Africa and be on the ground and see the people and say, well, what's going on here? Why is it that we are in some of these countries? We were then in Zaire, which is now DRC. And why is it that, okay, places are shuttered, that there used to be a town here? Why is it that the women are the ones that we saw doing so much work, carrying loads on their heads, a baby on the back and a baby in their belly, and the people with shoes on were men, or the people smoking cigarettes were men? We kept asking ourselves, well, what's going on here? And what I would say from that, though, is what it started us on was a learning journey. And the foundation for us continues to be a learning journey. We didn't know even a quarter what we know about malaria back then. We didn't know anything about really the big childhood killer diseases, or really this lag in vaccines between when they get out in the United States or the UK and they go to a place like Africa. So it began this journey for us of learning as a couple that then got us on the path to say, well, where would we invest this money? How would we use it in a catalytic way that we think could have the most impact? And I will say for us as a couple, it's been not only an intellectual journey, but a really rewarding and fulfilling journey for us as a couple in terms of what we learned together.
Leon, I think you had a thought.
Yeah, I would say a few things. I would agree with almost all the points that have been made up here. I think it's a mixture, actually, and it is a journey between intellectual appeal and emotional. I mean, I grew up in a family where intellectually giving was part of being, human. If, it was the dichotomy, if I'm not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And finding that right balance. And so I think one starts by writing checks, as Steve was saying, to a number of different things that might have an appeal to you, whether they be cultural, whether they be educational, whether they be medical. And that's how I started down this path. And if anything, I probably held back a little too long because I said, I really want to make an impact, so I want to wait till I've made more money. And so I only wrote, kind of checks as opposed to really trying to start something that was more personal. I think when you see other models out there, and clearly what the Gates Foundation represents today is a model for all of us to admire, but there are other models. There are models, whether it's the Broad Institute or what the Tisch family has done or what the Milken Institute has done, where you learn that you can make a difference. And it is empowering, and it is empowering to think that you can empower other human capital and unleash them in really productive ways. So, we have pursued various, as a family, cultural things, whether it be in the arts or in education, but really the most personal and where I think we're really making our biggest mark today was when my wife was diagnosed with melanoma cancer 5 years ago. It was a misdiagnosis where a recurring plantar's wart on her foot for 5 years turned out to be a stage 2 melanoma, and that was very scary. And it was kind of a wake-up call. She's fine, which is the great news, but even better than that, we took a page out of Milken's approach and what he's done with prostate cancer, where he's now been able to reduce morbidity rates in prostate cancer almost in half over the last 20 years, and say maybe we can make a difference in starting a melanoma research alliance and empower the best and the brightest on the condition that they collaborate, that they work with each other, that they share their research, and fast forward basically giving them money with a vetting process with kind of a who's who scientific advisory board, but getting it out on a global basis to make a difference. And the work that is happening now is incredibly encouraging and exciting. And we've gotten, 30 or so young investigators involved, and this was a field where really nothing had happened for 40 years. That was the frightening thing we learned when my wife was originally diagnosed. And now this is one of the areas that is most hotly pursued. Recently at ASCO, it was kind of the talk in the last few years, and it's having salutary effects on lung cancer, on kidney cancer, and so that's the emotional side. And I couldn't agree with you more. There is a spectrum. I think there's some that's totally intellectual, and that's good. All of this is good. But if you can have the emotional passion too, as you were saying, Melinda, that's even better. And that was our moment, was a personal
I agree with everything
one.
you said. It's a mix of things, but I think it's also worth pointing out, and some of the discussions today from many people in this room, I think, really highlighted this. We're also giving, all of us, because we want to have an impact. We want to change the world. And how do you have the maximum impact? Ideally, with the most modest investment. That's whether you're an investor or an entrepreneur starting a company, how do you take a little bit of resources and have the broadest possible impact? So looking for ways to get leverage and maximize the impact is not about the input of writing the check, it's about the output, what actually happens. We're all trying to change the world in our own ways. Everybody has their own things they particularly care about. But I think we shouldn't just focus on the beginning process, which is kind of the check writing. It's how do you have the impact. I think what we've all learned is it's hard. It takes a lot of work. But if all you do is write the check and then figure you're done, no, it's really kind of like investing in a company. A venture capitalist writes the check, but then the real value they provide is the expertise they help to guide that investment, the network that surrounds those entrepreneurs in terms of people they can bring into the organization. And I think trying to take those same lessons and apply them to this role, I think, is very important.
We have,
Most
go ahead, David.
of the people who got into the Forbes 400 got there by having an idea and pursuing that idea as long as they could, and it created great wealth typically for them. They didn't really care about making the money so much as pursuing the idea. I think in Bill's case, you were interested in proving that the software you could develop was the best software in the world, and things like that. And so the same principle really applies in philanthropy. You want to find something that you can really do that make the world a better place, and unless you have a passion for it, you're not going to really succeed. If you just want to make money, you're just probably not going to make money just because you want to make money. You've got to have a passion for doing something great in the business world that creates a new idea, a new service, and you push it forward. Same thing is true in philanthropy. You have to have an idea of something you want to do, and you put into it the same passion. And I want to agree with Steve. The ancient word for philanthropy that the Greeks invented had nothing to do with giving away money. Philanthropy means love of humanity, love of people. And for the ancient Greeks, that meant giving your time, your energy, and your money. And I really wish we had a way of saying, here are the best philanthropists in the country, people who've given away not money, but their time, their energy, their ideas, because everybody doesn't have the ability to be in the Forbes 400 and give away large sums of money. It's great that people do so, but most people in the United States really only have the ability to give away their time and their energy and their ideas, some money, but not nearly the kind of money we're talking about represented here. So I really hope that the philanthropy movement, which 3 people on this stage really helped develop, as a global phenomenon, is seen not just as wealthy people giving away money, but wealthy people giving away their time, their energy, and their ideas, and encouraging other people to give away whatever they can, ideas, energy, or their time.
I want to ask a 2-part question about obligation. I think a lot of people today have talked about they feel an obligation or they don't feel an obligation to give back. But there's also a question of, do you feel there's an obligation not just to give back, but to do it in a public way to show that those who've achieved incredible success give back to society? How much is it an individual internal obligation versus some external obligation?
Well, for us, it went back to what I said before. We weren't sure initially we wanted to do it. What we concluded was, after this lesson of trying different things, including just kind of more writing the check model, that how do you get the maximum leverage, the maximum network effect? And some of that is doing it publicly and trying to get other people to rally around your cause. That's what we were spending more and more time doing with the businesses we were trying to build and the nonprofits we're starting or trying to scale. So it made sense when we were approached that the idea of the Giving Pledge and making a public commitment, we thought would motivate others potentially to make a public commitment. And not just, as David said, not just the wealthy, but even in our letter we put on the Giving Pledge site, we talked about democratizing philanthropy. A lot of the focus has been on building the platforms to make those small donations from lots of people have a significant impact. So it was to inspire other people, as well as to then create a network effect among the givers, so everybody was just a little bit smarter in what they were trying to do.
And where did the 50% number come from?
Warren should speak to that.
I said 0 and Bill said 100, so we compromised. It came out of the air. But I would bet that most of the people who have joined the Giving Pledge will not only give more than 50%, I think they'll give appreciably more than 50%, and they're doing it. So you have to have a cutoff point at some place. But I don't think we reduced anybody's expectations by using that number.
I want to just speak to the public versus private piece, because I think one of the things when you are giving money away is, for us, it would have been nice to just kind of be private, actually, about some of it. In fact, early on, we were doing a lot of things behind the scenes privately. And I don't know, maybe, Bill was already very visible because of the business. But for me, I liked to do it privately. I liked to fly under the radar screen. It was nice when we could go into countries and, the government didn't know we were there, so I could go see projects on the ground very anonymously. But what I've learned, again, and I've talked to many of, in particular, the spouses who have a little bit of uncomfortableness about this, should I be public about it? One of the things that we've learned, and I know Steve and Jean talk very eloquently about this, is that your voice in these things matter. And so if you're going to galvanize people around a particular issue that you care about, be it cancer, you've been affected by the Millikins, they've been affected by you. We've been affected by others who've given in the areas that we've given in, and vice versa. But if you want to galvanize governments to give money around big causes, or other philanthropists to come together around a cause that you care deeply about, you've got to be more public about it, and you've got to use your voice. And one of the knock-on effects is that you do end up inspiring other people. And that is not necessarily your intent when you start out. Your intent is all about the impact and how are we going to make a difference in this cause. But you do affect others by what you do. And I think that's one of the things we've learned. And for me, it's one of the reasons I've been willing to be more public about our giving, even though it didn't come naturally to me from the get-go in any sense of the word.
It's a fundamental premise of the Giving Pledge that it is important for people to declare themselves. And we've actually had a few people that have talked about not writing a letter and can they just join. We don't want that because it's fine they want to give, but in the end, an important part of the Giving Pledge is the fact that a wide spectrum of people, ages, and all different interests, everything else, are explaining why to them it's important that they give half or more. And all 81 letters aren't going to hit a chord with a given reader, but a few will, and that's what counts.
I've had a chance, both in dinners around the United States and in China and India and other places, to be in a lot of discussions about philanthropy, and this topic come up a number of times. Perhaps the most interesting was when I was in the Middle East, actually in Jeddah, and there was a group in the room as wealthy on average as this group, and really struggling with it. But one of them mentioned that in the Quran it actually says the reason to talk about your philanthropy is if it encourages other people to do the same. And in that case, you have an obligation to talk about your philanthropy. And it's a tricky thing, because are you trying to get credit for it, or are you rather just trying to be able to share what's worked and what's not worked? I think it's been fantastic where you can get groups together who can talk about what makes it fun, what makes it not be fun. Should you have staff? How do you involve colleagues and children and things? And here are the different ways people have solved that. And so I do think that being off by yourself, just doing it's fine. That's one option. But I don't think you'll learn quite as much or enjoy it quite as much if you can find a group of fellow travelers in terms of philanthropy in general, or people who are working on education or medical research or environment or Africa. You're going to make a lot of the same mistakes if you're not somehow in an environment where people are being very open with each other.
This issue that Melinda brought up, and it was actually a big topic at this last Giving Pledge meeting, of how do you influence others beyond what you're doing, particularly governments. You could start with a premise of you could do what you're doing on your own. That's great. You could say, let's network that together with other givers and have more impact. That's great. You could then go another level and say, how do you interact with companies and create public-private partnerships that really integrate what you care about into what maybe hundreds of companies are doing on a global basis? That has even more impact. And then the final step is, how do you integrate governments and leverage what they're doing or influence what they're doing? As Melinda said this morning, do the risky things in this world, and then when you're looking to scale them, plug into governments. That gives you even more impact. Now, each of these is a little bit harder. In some ways, easier to stay here, a little harder to do this, harder still to do this, much harder to do this. But if you really want to have a big impact on these big issues, it requires stepping out of your comfort zone and trying to create that network effect.
As you guys talk, and five of the people on this panel are pledgers, what's the thing that has surprised you guys most when you're talking to each other? What's one thing that you weren't expecting that came forward?
I think we've had more success than we anticipated. I don't know whether Bill and Melinda would agree with that.
Yeah, I think that this value of a frank discussion of, should I have you get professionals involved, and talking through some of the things that haven't gone as well. I think that the fact that people really want to do that, and they have such great stories about what's brought them to give, it kind of re-inspires everybody when you get together.
I'll tell you one surprise, and Bill would be better able to speak to this than I. But twice I've been with Bill and Melinda in Beijing, and then again in Delhi, and it was amazing to me. We had about 50 people, I would say, at both of those dinners, and it was a carbon copy of the discussions that we'd had around this country. People talked about their kids, they talked about their businesses. Once they got going, it's very important to get the first olive out of the bottle. I mean, but once they get the evening could go on forever. I mean, the people really want to talk about it, and they have the same concerns. They obviously have some different views from their culture and some different attitudes about what the government should do and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of common characteristics between the billionaires in Beijing and in Delhi and in New York.
A very interesting phenomenon. The United States leads the world in philanthropy. We give roughly, I guess, about 2 to 3% of GDP to philanthropy every year. Most of that is actually to religious organizations. That's the biggest single amount of philanthropy. No one else in the world is even close to us. But I think the greatest impact of the Giving Pledge will actually be outside the United States in time, because other people still look to the United States as a leader, as a moral leader in certain ways, and as a leader in philanthropy. And in time, I believe other parts of the world will see that what we've done here has done a very good thing to help make the United States a better place and to make the lives of people better. And I think you will see people who are just coming into money into China and Brazil and other countries, beginning as they feel comfortable with their wealth and it's going to be stable, they're going to start giving away. And I think they will look to the Giving Pledge as an example of it. The thing that's most surprised me is that people come up and thank you dramatically. I mean, when you build a company and you've made a lot of success in business, nobody ever came up and said thank you for doing that. When you give away money, people thank you. And I'm most surprised that when I've given away money that helped things in Washington or the federal government or things like that, people come up to you and say, well, it's great, you're a patriot. And I say, well, no, a patriot is somebody that went in the military, somebody's a policeman, a fireman, a teacher. Giving away money to help the federal government is not necessarily a patriotic thing, but people think that you're doing patriotic things. It makes you feel good, even though the truth is you're not any more patriotic than anybody else. And I've been surprised at how much attention some modest gifts are. You can give a relatively modest amount to certain causes, and people get enormously excited about it. Sometimes you can give away hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, and you sometimes don't get the attention because people can't grasp the enormity of what you're doing. In some cases, what you're doing is changing the face of Africa, but you probably don't get the same impact as if you gave a lesser sum to some institution in the United States that everybody knows.
Well, David gave money to the Smithsonian National Zoo to promote panda sex, and that got a lot of attention. That's really what he's promoting, truth be told.
Not
It was
patriotism.
panda conservation.
I'm going to throw it open to the room, although before I do, does anybody here have a question they'd like to ask of each other? Open shot. Otherwise, we've got about 20 minutes, and I know a lot of people. And we have, just like with the lunch with Warren, I think we should keep the cameras rolling. This is a historic panel. It's $100 billion, give or take, in terms of pledged, confirmed pledges for charity they're giving.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
For Bill and Melinda. I think what Warren did was giving away such a significant amount to the Gates Foundation with essentially no strings attached, no naming rights. He didn't say, oh, rename it the Gates and Buffett Foundation. It was really an unbelievable charitable gift. I think it inspired everybody. One piece of it that I think got some people concerned, and you even alluded to it today, and I understand why he did it, was 10 years after your death, it all has to be given away.
Yep.
How much of a burden does that create, that amount of dollars being deployed that quickly? And do you worry about that? Do you try to make sure you keep them healthy?
Absolutely. I mean,
We try to switch him from Coke to Diet Coke, but it's not working.
Diet Cherry Coke.
Except changing my diet.
we care a lot about Warren's health. No, it's interesting to think at some point we'll have to increase the spend rate. We haven't gone with the 5% spend rate. We're closer to 7% at this point, and there may even be some things that would drive us a little bit above that, that are particular things we want to get done. So we're not really driven by the minimum, but we're at 7% now. We'll effectively have to be at more like 8% during that 10-year period. And so we will get back into a mode, which we haven't been in recently, of making sure we're hitting the threshold. I think because we've had so much time to learn about various things, it won't be a problem at all. That is, those dollars will have just as much impact as the other things we've given. But it's fascinating. Our time frame is more like 20 or 30 years after we pass away. So you'd call that a pretty small difference point of view. There are other people who believe in perpetuity, and that's perfectly fine. There were some historical foundations like Rockefeller that's sort of perpetuity, and there's some that aren't as well known that spent their money. The more you think about it, the more having a finite limit, I think, makes sense, because you can really go after a particular thing and count on the rich people of the future to understand better what problems need to be addressed and exactly who should go after those problems.
I think it's worth saying that, Warren has influenced us hugely in our giving. I mean, hugely, in terms of, originally when we set our will up, we said, okay, the foundation would live, 50 years beyond the last of us. We've recently moved that into 25 years. Warren's thinking about don't leave it to your children. That's influenced us hugely. Take big risks. Don't swing. He says swing for the fences. Don't go for the easy pitches. I mean, that rings in your ears, particularly when you're going to do something that takes some guts, right? And so it's worth saying that he's just been an unbelievable inspiration to us and continues to be in this philanthropy. And I would encourage all of you, to think about what you want to do. You will inspire others the way Warren has inspired us, and it really is something.
Great message. Okay, so let's open into the room. Please identify yourself, and also keep the questions short, please, so that we can get more questions in. You have one back there.
I'm Bill Woodson. Can you give the audience some advice about how you maintain your enthusiasm given the inevitable challenges you face when you get more actively involved in your philanthropy? Many people become disenfranchised, they become disappointed when they confront those challenges and retrench. You've been able to overcome those seemingly. And how did you do that?
Well, if you take 5 different items that might affect, each one of which might affect the lives of millions of people, and one of them is going to succeed, and that's more or less your probability going in, you should not get discouraged at all about the other 4. I mean, if you're doing important things, particularly with the bigger money, I mean, you should be doing things that can change lots of lives, and you should be doing things that have some real chance of failing. If they're easy, let somebody else do them, or they've probably already been done. So failure is not failure. You know, failure is, I mean, you know, if A-Rod is here and he's you know, he bats 350, I mean, you can say, well, he didn't hit 650, but 350 is terrific. And it's the same way in philanthropy. You want to do it intelligently. You want to focus, if you have the funds, you want to focus on big things, but you don't want to focus on sure things, you know, because you won't be accomplishing anything. Therefore, you should not get discouraged about the fact that 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, or maybe 4 out of 5 don't work out the way you want. If 1 out of 5 does, you know, and you change millions of lives, you should feel very good about what you've done.
Well, the other piece is that people in this room know this, that building the businesses that led to the success that give you the opportunity to give back are struggles as well. There's very few overnight successes. In the case of AOL, we had 3 or 4 near-death experiences, some at the hands of my friend here. But you kind of kept at it and eventually kind of broke through. So that persistence, that perseverance, I think, is an important skill set in anything you do. I think it's one of the key things we certainly try to make sure our kids understand it. It's rare that whatever you try the first time is an overnight success. Occasionally you get lucky, but it really is the exception to the rule. I think most of the stories I've heard here today are similar in that respect. It was a struggle, and eventually you kind of broke through. That's true as well. And we also know the difference between success and failure sometimes is inches, and just staying with it and having that perseverance and not giving up and being fearless is the difference between success and failure in anything you do.
Leon,
I would go a step further. I think so much of the reason, I would say, that people are on the Forbes 400 is because they are tenacious problem solvers. And when they had challenges, they had goals. None of those goals were achieved easily. And it took them years to get to where they got to. And I would just say in the field of philanthropy, it's a broader canvas, if you will, of a problem-solving challenge in front of us, whether it has to do with fighting poverty or disease or education. And I think it's almost as if so much of what came before is the experience and the education for all of us to then be able to paint on that broader canvas. I would also say that the psychic rewards with this other canvas in so many ways are so much more refreshing. I know one of the things we've learned as a family in dealing with scientists and teachers, much of the world I've lived in the last 30 years is the world of Wall Street, is of finance. The goal has been to make money. And when you deal with teachers and scientists, you're dealing with so many brilliant young people where money is just foreign. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters in terms of making a living, but it is not their motivation in terms of who they are. And I find this unbelievably refreshing to see this type of brain power out there and the dedication. So if anything, I find dealing in the world of what we're doing in philanthropy energizing and a very positive thing.
David?
I tell students all the time, you have to ignore what your parents want you to do, because if you do just what your parents want you to do, you're going to be miserable in life. Find something that you're passionate about that you want to do, because only if you find something you really love will you be successful. The same is true in philanthropy. If you find something that you're doing because it's socially acceptable, you're never really going to enjoy it. Find something that you love and you really think you can make the world a slightly better place, or maybe a very large better place by doing it. And you get to experiment, just as you experiment with many different jobs until you find something you love. Experiment with philanthropy. Find something you really love where you think that you're making the difference and your existence on the face of the earth is justified by your doing something that's really made the world a better place for some other people.
Another question.
Question over there? Yeah.
Mark? Quick one?
Thank you. Clearly, you're all already iconic for your accomplishments and your successes, but 50 years, 100 years from now, how would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
Still alive?
Yeah.
For sure.
Any others?
Well, I don't think anybody does philanthropy to be remembered. You do take on audacious goals. You know, the improving the U.S. education system, taking the 8 million children that die every year around the world and getting that number down below 2 million. You can state some pretty exciting things that definitely can take place. And you know, it's nice if there's some intermediate milestones on those things. Certainly in the health area, there's a lot of metrics. In the education area, there's a lot of metrics in environment, agriculture. And so, you know, you'd like to achieve these phenomenal goals.
Any other? We have a question right up here.
Bill, just now you said that you need to talk about your philanthropy, and I must say I totally agree with you. And I think what you and Warren Buffett and Melinda and all of you have done have actually inspired a lot of people. And actually, personally, I'm inspired by what you all have done. And I did the same thing last year. I pledged I'll give half my wealth away in my country. And when you guys went to China and did the same thing, you met a lot of wealthy people. Now, that was very well publicized. I think I remember I read it, and there was a lot of publicity. And also there was publicity about you guys went to India. Now, what you all have done actually will inspire people, many wealthy people, to give away, a good part of their wealth. And we all know that all wealthy people need very little of their wealth for their own needs, and they should give it away. And I totally admire Warren, what you have, giving away everything, leaving very little for your children. That is truly incredible. Most families in Asia don't do that, and they want to leave all for their families. So what you all have done is truly inspiring, and you should visit more countries more, and do what you do, meet wealthy people and pass on the message. And you'll get publicity locally to inspire others who, one day will become wealthy and remember what you guys have done.
Well, what has the reaction been when you guys have taken the show on the road? When you've gone to China?
I think one of the things that we've learned, particularly in some of the Asian countries and in India, is, again, as Warren said, they're very, very similar discussions in the U.S. as they are in India and other places, but also that first generation, the generation that makes the wealth, particularly we're seeing a lot of movement in the tech sector in India, they're very energized to not only give money back, but to do what you're hearing so many of the people in the room talk about today, which is to use their brains against something that they see in their country that needs change. So we're seeing incredible Indian philanthropy around education, starting in the health sector now. So to tackle the problems in their own backyard is very much of interest, but I think if you really make sure you get to that first generation of wealth before it's handed down to the next generation, sometimes the second generation feels like, well, I've got to hang on to it. It was given to me, and I've got to pass it along. But the first generation says, hey, we made it, and it's ours to give it away as well. And so I think that is a common theme we're seeing really across the world.
Yeah, that's true in the United States, too. I mean, there is some feeling, it's a generalization, there's plenty of exceptions, but in talking to people, if they inherited it themselves, they feel they're breaking a covenant to some extent if they don't continue the policy. That's not universal, but and I can understand that. I mean, it's a very understandable human reaction, but I try and talk them out of it.
In the United States, we have a number of people that have signed the pledge, and we want to get more people to sign the pledge. There are a great many wealthy people who haven't yet signed it for various reasons. But one of the concerns I have is that because of the so-called 99-1% divide, many people who are in the 1% are very afraid of being identified as having an enormous amount of wealth, and they don't want the publicity associated perhaps with announcing they're giving away. But I think that's a false concern. Because of the Forbes 400, people know who the wealthy people are, and I do think that those people who have the wealth are almost certainly going to give it away anyway, because there's not many other things you can do with it. I don't think you can give that much of it to your children. I do think more people should sign on to the pledge, and I hope more people will be inspired by the example of Bill and Melinda and Warren to do so, because they put an enormous amount of effort into this. And to be honest, without flattering them, they are the 3 biggest philanthropists in the world, the entire world. They're sitting right here. And I don't know who arranged the program to put me on it. I'm happy to be on the same panel with them, but the truth is they're the 3 biggest philanthropists, and they've done a great job, and I hope other people will be inspired by what they've done to really give away and publicly give away the amount of money that they've earned over their lifetime.
We have time for one last quick question. John Kluge.
So I have an offer and a question. The question relates to the offer. The offer is, earlier today you heard from several next generation philanthropists who are trying to affect change in very different ways. This is a really tiny, tiny fraction of the amount of people of my generation that are out there putting their time into these issues. So my offer is to, one, lend my own personal support as well as our company's in terms of aligning the next generation to join the pledge. The question is actually when and where would you like to meet to talk about that? Warren, I promise you that I won't offer you $50,000 for your time, unlike my dad. But.
Too bad your dad didn't have more influence.
So, John, I think you make a really good point, and this is something that we're starting to hear a lot of, which is really fantastic, that the pledge is actually having some knock-on effects. I mean, we're seeing university presidents now have come together and signed on to give 5% of their salaries away in terms of that. We're seeing people like the Salwin family came up. They did a book, where they literally gave away half their wealth. They sold their house and gave half away, and they give a huge amount of time. They're now influencing young kids in Atlanta who are actually in impoverished settings. They bring them together to say, how could you give away time even though you're in difficult circumstances? This millennial generation that was talked about this morning, we're seeing so much movement in terms of kids wanting to give. When I say kids, people coming out of college in their 20s and 30s wanting to give back their time, their energy, their resources. So we're still in the point of kind of figuring out how the Giving Pledge goes beyond this group. At this point, I think our next goal is to try and get at least 100 people pledged to the Giving Pledge, because then we can say, wow, this has really taken hold. And then we do want to have others help us take it beyond this. So we'd love to talk with you more about that after this.
I also think your discussion this morning, I think, was important around impact investing, social enterprise. It's an emerging space, somewhat controversial, different points of view, but I think this millennial generation is not satisfied with these separate worlds of you make money over here, you give money over here. And some of these blended models, and I think it'll take 10 or 20 years for this really to be refined and honed, I think are very important. And the companies that really are trying to build doing good into their core model, I think is very important. I think it's also worth pointing out, because several people are still running companies, that what the companies are doing every day is extremely important as well. The core business of a Microsoft or an AOL, any of these companies, they change the world in many ways more than any other thing we could do philanthropically. So leveraging that platform is critically important, and using it as a launch pad to do other things is critically important. And oh, by the way, because I'm also spending time on jobs and entrepreneurship, this country was built by entrepreneurs, and our reason we have the leading economy in the world is because of entrepreneurs, and the reason we therefore how much influence in the world as a nation is because of entrepreneurs. So celebrating what you do every day in terms of those businesses and really recognizing that's a key way to contribute to making the world a better place, and then supplementing that with philanthropy. And if you're interested in looking for ways to blur the lines a little bit and figure out, are there models for the future that might be better for people who want to work at your company, better for customers, and potentially have broader impact. That's where I think the thinking is going to come from this, this so-called millennial generation about different models, different approaches, not just more of the same.
We also have to, and the Giving Pledge, the truth is that the Giving Pledge age is a little above, let's say, the average age in the United States. The average age in the United States is, I think, about 38 or 37. And the Giving Pledge people are, let's say, a few years above that. What we want to do is make sure that the younger generation doesn't see that philanthropy is just something you do when you hit your 50s or 60s. Unfortunately, I didn't really start until I was 54. I wish I had started earlier, but I want to find ways that we can encourage people in their 30s and 40s to start giving away and being involved in philanthropy, because that'll be better for the country if we can get people to do it at a much younger age.
I want to thank our panel, not just on behalf of Forbes and everybody here, but on behalf of everybody. You guys really are changing the world, and we all owe you a depth of gratitude. Thank you.